It's often forgotten, but before Ronald Reagan defeated President Jimmy Carter in 1980, he first came up short in a bitter fight. It was a fight over delegates, and it played out at the 1976 Republican Convention. Reagan challenging President Gerald Ford with a real chance of knocking him off. Now, Reagan came to the convention in Kansas City that summer trailing Ford in the delegate count, but the margin was small, meaning there was plenty of opportunity there for Reagan if he could just pick off a handful of delegates. If he could do that, he could swing the convention away from Ford, away from the sitting president, and he could walk away with the Republican nomination. All that power in the hands of those Republican convention delegates. It made each one of them very, very important to both candidates.
As soon as Reagan left his hotel this morning, he began running into Ford supporters. It was obviously a coordinated campaign by some Ford workers to harass Reagan as he began visiting state delegations. Reagan continued to visit state delegations, searching for new delegates. When he arrived at the Virginia delegation, he found that 3 of that state's 4 uncommitteds were at that moment meeting with President Ford. A Ford spokesman said it was a coincidence, but he said he wasn't sorry about it.
There was a dirty trick report at the convention yesterday. Ford supporters told the Justice Department that a Reagan backer had tried to bribe several delegates for their votes for sums as high as $2,500. We have, I guess, the large majority of all the uncommitted delegates to the Republican convention, and I'm at a table now of a group of people from Virginia, and I want to talk to 2 or 3 of them.
I'm going to wait until tomorrow night. I want to talk with Mr. Reagan, which I did not get to yesterday.
You've talked to the president, but you have not had a chance to talk to Mr.
I
Reagan.
went to the White House on a chartered plane and talked to Mr. Ford up at the White House.
Reagan may have had the movie star appeal going for him, but President Ford won out in no small part because of the trappings he could offer to all those delegates. Flights aboard Air Force One, cocktails at the White House, even a state dinner with Britain's Queen Elizabeth II while the monarch was in town. Now, Reagan's ace card, well, that was his Hollywood connections. He tried to lure delegates with private meetings with stars like John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart. Didn't quite work out for him. Ford prevailed in the end at that convention, then lost to Jimmy Carter in the fall. And now, 40 years later, Donald Trump and his rivals could be set to plunge into the exact same kind of delegate war, one governed by few rules about what exactly can be offered in exchange for the support of the uncommitted. On Sunday, Trump's new convention manager told Chuck Todd the campaign will do everything within legal and ethical bounds to win them over.
What is fair game in getting a delegate? Is paying for their convention costs? Is it golf club memberships? What's fair and unfair in this? What's ethical? What's unethical?
Well, there's the law, and then there's ethics, and then there's getting the votes. I'm not going to get into what tactics to use. I happen to think the best way we're going to get delegates is to have Donald Trump be exposed to delegates.
Advisors to Trump say they haven't ruled out entertaining delegates at one of Trump's resorts or paying their travel costs to the convention in Cleveland, but they say they are not offering seats on Trump Force One. Said one advisor, we can't give them $100,000, which, of course, begs the question, what can you give them? How far can you go to win support from a Republican delegate? Taking a look at that issue in today's Washington Post, Matea Gold writes, under regulations established in the 1980s, delegates cannot take money from corporations, labor unions, federal contractors, or foreign nationals. But an individual donor is permitted to give a delegate unlimited sums to support his or her efforts to get selected to go to the convention. Joining us now is Matea Gold, national political reporter for the Washington Post. Matea, thanks for being here. So translate what I just read into layman's terms for me and for anyone else who's a little confused by all of this. If you're the Trump campaign and you get to the end of the primary process and you're 40 delegates short and you need to win over some uncommitted delegates, where's the line? What can you do? What can you not do?
Well, the bottom line is that there's actually not been a lot of testing of the rules since they were issued in the 1980s by the FEC. So the campaign actually has a lot of purview to pay delegate expenses. And there's not really any standard set for what is reasonable in that context. Several campaign finance attorneys I spoke with said they think it would be perfectly fine under the rules to fly delegates for an all-expense-paid weekend, say, to Mar-a-Lago to meet with senior staff members. And so there is going to be, I think, a lot of testing of these rules, which haven't really gotten scrutiny in 40 years now.
That's what I keep thinking of. The last primary is June 7th. I'm thinking of the morning of June 8th. You know, right. A bunch of these unbound delegates were talking about getting a phone call saying, how'd you like to come down to Florida for a few days? But what about the other side of it then? If you're Cruz, if you're Kasich, if you're anybody who wants to stop Donald Trump, any rumblings of planning going on there, of things they might do to entice delegates?
Everyone's playing this very close to the vest right now, and they don't want to give away their strategies. And I think also part of this is the attorneys are furiously studying up on the rules, because I found that a lot of people weren't familiar with the regulations that do exist. And one real wild card that I think could come into play in this campaign that wouldn't have been a case, for example, in 1976, is that individual donors can give unlimited sums to delegates, and in some cases would never have to report those contributions if they weren't making them in connection with a candidate's campaign or as an independent expenditure. So that actually leaves room for a lot of behind-the-scenes goodies being thrown the way of delegates that we might not ever know about.
Boy, that talk about a throwback, that's something, all of the laws, all of the changes in procedure that throw so much into the open for everybody to see, this really would be a throwback to a different era, what you're describing there. What about the issue, though, of, I use the term optics all the time. If you're the Trump campaign, if you're the Cruz campaign, if this is the fight you're in over the summer, these fights are supposed to be about grand things, policy ideas, vision for the country, who has the better agenda, this sort of thing. If it looks like a bidding war they're getting into over who can provide the most goodies to delegates, that's not going to reflect well on anyone, is it?
And especially not in this year. You do not want to be caught making a deal in a smoke-filled room, handing delegates some kind of goodie to get their vote. I mean, I think the backlash would be enormous. I don't think there's any expectation of some sort of systematic effort to woo delegates with cash or gifts. What we really see now, though, is the potential for some bad actors to play in this game and try to influence some delegates at the margins. And I think that the campaigns are very, very well aware that if any kind of deal was made that would look unseemly and that came to light, that could really have a lot of blowback for them. So I expect that we'll see efforts to be fairly transparent about this. And not only that, the delegates we spoke with actually took a lot of umbrage at the idea that they could be bought off. So I do think that people will have to be careful about the offers they're making these folks.
I'd love to be one of those uncommitted delegates just to see what offers come in. I'd be very curious. Not that I could ever be tempted by something like that. Anyway, Matea Gold, national political reporter for the Washington Post. Thanks for the time.
Of course.
All right. And what do the FBI, the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., and the Embassy of Japan all have in common? Turns out they have a pretty interesting connection to the D.C. Madam scandal. Some new reporting on that tonight. Stay with us.